So where are you in relation to Halifax?
About 45 minutes down the South Shore. So I'm in Chester.
Oh, okay.
Chester, Mahone Bay, Lunenburg.
Yeah.
It seems to be when folks visit Halifax and they want to get to rural Nova Scotia, that seems to be where they go. And yeah, so I'm in Chester.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's nice to live in close proximity to Halifax, but it has its downsides as well.
Well, you know, we've been to Halifax a few times. We have friends there, but we we were in Chocolate Lake at the hotel there in the middle of the city.
Yep.
And we thought we could just walk wherever we wanted to go, and it's a long ways. We actually walked into Dartmouth to across the bridge. It was we walked 8 kilometers and then we're like, okay, let's call an Uber.
Yeah, I know people think that it's tiny, but and it doesn't have the same resources for folks to move about. And it's not I find once you enter into Quebec, urban centers are logically laid out. That's not the case here in Atlantic Canada, particularly Halifax. You know, you can get lost so easily. Whereas if you get to any of the larger cities, it's a grid. Not here.
But you have, like, you know, like it's the terrain, like you have like the rocky hills and the trees and, like, you know, it's like it's beautiful, but it's like it's hard to would be hard to get around, I guess. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, just the hills alone.
I know.
Yeah, I know. I drive an electric car, and it makes me nervous some days when I don't have a chance to plug in because, yeah, the terrain is very hilly, and yeah, definitely.
Okay, ladies, it is 10 o'clock, and I think as people come in, I'll just let them in. I just want to welcome everybody today to SEDA's final Road to Summit series webinar. My name is Jessica Rosthern, and I've been helping Verona with SEDA just coordinate some of these sessions over the past few months. And I'm joining you today from Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. In regards to the provincial summit coming up in October, they have now opened up virtual options this morning, and all sessions will be available and recorded to in-person attendees as well as remote attendees. An updated agenda with additional sessions is also now online, and I will send everybody the links and put them in the chat. This morning, we ask that the audience stay muted until it's time for the Q&A. And then you can also submit some questions in the chat as we are going through and as you kind of think of them, and we will get to them at the end. And again, this webinar is going to be recorded and uploaded onto SEDA's website. And so just a brief introduction of our guest today. We have Lesley she's all the way in Nova Scotia, and she's from Community Transit, and she's going to be talking about the network of providers in Nova Scotia. It looks like there are some charter services as well as traditional door-to-door service providers there, and Lesley will kind of get into more detail about that. And we also have Nicole Lerat from the town of Rosthern, and Nicole will share with us the services that are available in Rosthern, and we'll just have a conversation, and I have some panel questions for both ladies here today. So Nicole, maybe we'll just start with you. You know, how do you feel that the transit services in Rosthern align? You know, like, is it similar to some of the services provided, like the services provided in Nova Scotia that you know of at this point? Or maybe you're not too sure yet?
I'm not too sure yet, but
Yeah.
so Rosthern's a community of around 1,800 people, and so we just have one vehicle, and the service we provide is mainly to seniors, persons with physical, mobility issues, with mental health issues, some children, I guess, and some charters for, you know, different things like the rec programming that we offer in town here. So it's very specific to vulnerable populations, I guess I'd say.
That kind of leads us into our first question. So specialized transportation services are essential for vulnerable populations, such as the elderly and individuals with disabilities. Do the service providers in Nova Scotia address the transportation needs of these groups? And what best practices can be shared? For you, maybe Lesley, to answer that.
Yeah, no, for sure. So here in Nova Scotia, we have a bit of a mixed smattering of types of providers. And my organization tries to work with the entire sector to be able to connect them and make it as seamless as possible. One element of that sector are 23 not-for-profit organizations that sound very similar to what Nicole just described. So they are door-to-door accessible operators. They service specific geographic regions. They operate independently, so they don't necessarily share riders. It came about way back 25 years ago. There were a couple of gentlemen who were paraplegics who lived in very rural areas and wanted to continue and maintain their lifestyle, but knew that they needed to have transportation. And so they worked together and lobbied government to form two of the founding organizations. And so from a vulnerable sector population, absolutely. But because there's such a lack of transportation in rural Nova Scotia, or connectivity of what does exist, it goes beyond vulnerable populations to they try their best to meet the needs of everybody. But you know, so it's accessible from a mobility perspective. They have ridership that have mental health issues. They work with folks of varying incomes and abilities intellectually, you know, physically. Food security is a real issue in rural Nova Scotia, so they spend a lot of their time making sure that folks have access to food and other services. Education, even like trying to get folks to and from educational sessions. So I think as time has progressed and 20 years out, we now have 23 of these operators. And so there are a lot of best practices that have been put into place because why reinvent the wheel? Each organization is a grassroots homegrown solution to its specific community needs, but there are certainly elements that transcend all 23 of them. And I guess the unique piece for those 23 is because those two gentlemen had the foresight at the start to involve government. There's a provincial program that funds these 23 operators, and a stipulation of that programming is some standardization or some following of those best practices. So it's no longer just the wheelchair bus. They have you know, a variety of vehicles in their fleet to meet the needs of all the populations they have to serve.
That's great. Thank you. Nicole, do you have any comments at all in respect to Rosthern?
Well, you know, this service in Rosthern started in 1982, and it was basically volunteers, and there was capital funding from the province to get it going. As time has gone on, and we have less and less volunteers, you know, it's turned into a service that, you know, the town provides. So it's really trying to find, you know, what is it going to be used for the most. So the majority of our riders are for medical appointments. So it's just working with those healthcare providers, keeping that communication open with them to ensure that these users can get to that service and knowing when they're open and when they're available.
Thank you. In rural communities, transportation often plays a vital role in supporting local businesses and economic development. Can either of you share any stories of economic development impact?
you want to go first, Nicole?
Sure. I guess every year when at budget time, there's always a council member that says, you know, is this service worth it? Because it's a huge deficit for the town. It's subsidized by the taxpayers. But the answer is yes, it is worth it, because there's both social and economic benefits to it. So we've been told by many users that if we didn't have the service, they wouldn't be able to live here. You know, those same users that go to the medical clinic, or they go to the grocery store, they go to the pharmacy, they go to the hairdresser. So there is some economic impact for sure.
Absolutely. And it would be the same in Nova Scotia. You know, in rural Nova Scotia, you have to support your local businesses, but if you can't get to them, so there's that economic spinoff. But the other economic spinoff for us, now that the number of organizations have grown to 23, is it provides jobs for folks. So we have, you know, a fleet of over 100 vehicles. We have a staff of drivers of over 120, and over 50 positions of administration supporting that. And that's direct economic impact. But then when you think about the gas stations that are supported, the mechanics that are supported, you know, there's all that spin-off and secondary economic impact as well that we're seeing here in Nova Scotia.
Yes, Lesley, that's a very valid point. Thank you. We are definitely in need of rural transportation options here in Saskatchewan. What steps should a rural community take to assess its transportation needs and determine the feasibility of starting a new transportation service? Lesley, or either one, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Lesley. So I guess knowing what the need is, for sure is the place to start. And then meeting with, so like in Rosthern, for instance, you know, it's seniors needing rides for the most part. And so meeting with, you know, the groups, the senior groups, the nursing homes, you know, just getting their feedback. And, you know, we also surveys, I know people don't like surveys, but there is sometimes you get some information, and it might just be a little bit, but it's enough to help. And that often supports what you're doing, or the path you're going to take, or maybe it changes that path. But I think the survey or polls are important. And then seeing what funding programs are available as well from the province. In Saskatchewan, we have a capital transit funding option, and then there's an operating grant, which is based on ridership and usage. For us, that isn't huge, but you know, every little bit helps in operating that service.
So I would second those things. And in the last number of years, the network whom I'm with, we've worked with communities that have identified a need for transportation. So there hasn't been a service in place to get folks to the grocery store, to medical appointments, and they've followed all the steps that Nicole's mentioned, but they've also started with baby steps, right? So come up with a solution that's homegrown and sustainable within your community. It can grow, but if you start big, your overhead is going to be big, and chances are it's going to fail. So one community in particular, they started providing service a couple of days a week, knowing that that's what they had the funding to support. The other piece I think that's really important is bringing the partners together to make it a successful project. So whether those are in-kind partners or funding partners. So not everything is government's responsibility, is what we hear a lot here in Nova Scotia. And it's true. They're, you know, an in-kind partner is as important as a cash dollar partner. And so I think you have to have all of those things around the table to move forward.
You touched on this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Nicole.
No, I have a question for you, Lesley. So are you, your organization that you work for, is it nonprofit or is it a government agency?
The organization that I work for is a non-for-profit. We do receive some operating funding from the province to support the transportation sector collectively. We do that in a number of ways. My organization does not provide transportation. We support the organizations that do. The 23 that I referenced are not-for-profits.
Okay.
So they have boards of directors and.
So it seems like there's a level between those providers and the government, and you're that level of support. So that's something we don't have here in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, and that's come about over time. So the role of my organization first started out after those two historic gentlemen I described started to work on their project and other communities got involved. They recognized the benefit of coming together and sharing lessons learned. And then they also learned that, you know, one voice is louder than three voices independently when talking to the provincial government. And so my organization has evolved over time, but we also support and connect the private sector as well. And the municipal run fixed route services in the urban areas. So depending on the type of service, depends on whether it's a not-for-profit, a private, or municipal led, but we support them all.
You have kind of touched on this already, Lesley, but I'm just going to read this 5th question here. Building partnerships and community support is crucial for a successful transportation service. How can local leaders engage residents, businesses, and organizations to gain support for the initiative? Do you have any suggestions or best practices in Nova Scotia?
Identify common needs. So, you know, if it's a rec program and they're having real difficulty in getting folks out to the programs, and the programs are continuously being canceled because folks can't get to them, that's a common need. In terms of the economic piece, you know, partnering with the various businesses that may be within the community that need folks to get to them, or the medical center, right? Folks need to get to there. So identifying groups who have a common need and then agreeing to set individual agendas aside to try and focus and solve the problem for everybody. I'm really sorry, my doorbell's ringing, so I'm going to mute.
So it's kind of the same here in Rosthern, you know, looking at that need, but you know, in reality, everyone needs to support the transit service here, because ultimately the taxpayers' dollar funds the majority of the deficit. So, you know, again, I talked about that survey earlier, and it was interesting because one of the questions was about the tax dollar, you know, funding that service. And it was very surprising that a lot of people said, we don't use the service, we probably never will, but we definitely support, you know, taxes funding that. So that was good to see, I guess, because it is an important service. It might only serve, you know, a minority of the population here, but it's still important.
Funding is a significant hurdle for new transportation services. Are you aware of any potential funding sources and grant opportunities should a rural community explore when launching a transportation program? Perhaps programs open on a national basis. How can a rural community plan for the ongoing funding and maintenance of a transportation service to ensure its viability in the future? You did touch on a few different programs there, Nicole, in terms of some different government programs for funding.
Yeah, there's a couple, like the provincial funding for capital is for the purchase of a vehicle, and it covers up to 55% to a maximum of $55,000. That's the program right now. I know like Telemerical or other organizations may be able to assist with the remainder of a capital purchase like that. And again, that operating grant is not big dollars for us and is based on ridership, but every little bit helps. I'm not aware of any federal programs for transit, unless it's mass transit, and that's obviously we're a small community here. I know at one point I was in contact with neighboring communities to try and expand our service to make it more viable, to make it more attractive. You know, that's still a work in progress. Just, you know, trying to get that buy-in. So
just last year, our providers here in Nova Scotia were successful in completing an application to the Rural Transit Solutions Fund. So previously, in order to apply for that, it had to be a municipally owned service, but that's no longer the case for that funding. And it was a capital project program, and all in all, I think they were successful in getting something like 25 electric vehicles covered, 3 buses for the fixed route transits, and about another 50 vehicles brought into the fleet. So those 23 organizations. So that certainly has been a change in federal funding that you might want to check out, Nicole.
Yeah, no, sounds good.
The other piece that our providers here in Nova Scotia have been successful with is the community partner funding. So looking at United Ways, folks who are interested in supporting the marginalized populations in the community who may have some funding. We have here in Nova Scotia community health boards, which oftentimes our organizations have been successful in getting grants to help subsidize some of the fares. So again, it's looking at who in the community may be that funding partner. And then here, the majority of the 23, but not all, unfortunately, have ongoing operational funding from their municipal units as well. So it's getting that buy-in at that municipal level of, like Nicole said earlier, if people cannot get to the necessities that they need, they will not live in your community and your tax base will shrink.
Absolutely. Legal and regulatory aspects such as licensing and insurance are critical considerations when starting a transportation service. Can you share your experiences and best practices?
Nicole, do you want to address?
Sure. There are some things to keep in mind, I guess, when having a service like this. For example, if you're going to provide out of town charters, the licensing may be different, like the licensing for the driver. So that just depends on what province you're in, I guess. You know, also, I guess liability insurance, municipalities carry that already, so it's covered. But, you know, licensing for the bus package policy is not covered, so that's an extra expense. And then the biggest thing in my mind is the maintenance of the bus, because there's got to be annual inspections done. And I don't know, these buses are not built for our country, I don't think, because there's a lot of maintenance every year and it's very expensive, and especially when it comes to this specific type of vehicle, because you have to get it done at a certain place. I just find the costs are huge, so that's something to keep in mind too.
So here in Nova Scotia, we are heavily regulated, both on the driver's piece of it, the vehicle piece of it, and the operating license piece of it. So my organization has done a lot of work over the last couple of years working with the provincial regulator to create some documents to help folks navigate what those regulations are, and what they can and cannot do with the specific types of licensing that exist. And all of that increases the cost substantially. Which our neighbor in New Brunswick doesn't have nearly the regulation that we do. So obviously their their overhead costs of operating are, you know, marginal in comparison to ours here in Nova Scotia. But you have to make sure that you're operating, you know, in a safe manner as well for folks. Yeah. The other issue that we have, it's not regulation, but it's insurance, and, you know, insuring the vehicles and the drivers to be able to do the work that they want to do can sometimes be very, very costly.
Well, we're just on this topic. I'm just going to throw out a question here. So, are there transportation service fees, or are these, like, is there a fee for service for anyone using these transportation services?
Yes, we charge $4 out for a one-way in town, and you know, if there was more people using the bus, that would cover more. But I think on average, the fees cover about 25 to 30% of the expenses.
So they're fare-based here in Nova Scotia as well. And there isn't a standardized fare structure. Obviously, every organization is its own independent organization. Its operating costs vary, and so their fees depend on their operating costs. That's another piece of regulation here in Nova Scotia as well, is when your fees are set, you actually have to go through a process to change those fees with the regulator. So that can be a bit challenging sometimes. The one thing though that we've been successful with over the last number of years is getting some government departments to recognize that transportation is vital to what they're trying to do. And we've been able to secure some funding to subsidize some of the fees, particularly if folks need to travel long distances for medical appointments. That's one avenue that we can subsidize. But again, you know, there are some requirements that need to be met for those programs for folks.
So the fees are not regulated in Saskatchewan, but there is that operating funding is based on ridership, and so you have to keep stats of, you know, what type of rider it is and where they're going and stuff like that, and so, you know, but the regulation of fees, it's up to each municipality or each provider on what they want to charge. And the thing is, in a community like ours, we can't increase that fee too much because, you know, otherwise we're not going to be serving that population that we want to serve, that vulnerable population. The word I can't say, obviously.
Thank you. Let's see here. Technology can streamline operations and improve user experience. In Nova Scotia, are any of the service providers using scheduling apps or real-time tracking systems?
So they've been using, a couple of them have been creative and created their own. And other than that, they've all been doing their own thing. So just this past year, we've launched a project in partnership with the province. So the province has come on as the funding partner, that we are in the process of purchasing and having customized a dispatch software program that all 23 can use. The idea is it will create efficiencies within the organizations. It will be able to streamline some of the operation models a little bit so that it's not quite as confusing for folks in the community, the end user, who may be used to one service but then move to a new location and have to use another one. But the other piece of this software program that is certainly user focused is it will have a presence, a riders app that will look the same for everybody in Nova Scotia. So right now, folks log on to our website, they go on the Need a Ride page that we host to share the word about what services are available, and then they have to contact each individual provider who does something differently for everyone. So the idea being, at least they will be able to be familiar with that booking process. And it's available online for those folks who have access to that, and it'll be a little bit easier for folks to navigate, because that's one of the things we hear from people is it's really hard to find out who provides service in our area, what the parameters are, and how I can access it. So yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, that's really great. I mean, with the population, with the, the vulnerable sector, perhaps they're not going to be able to manage an app for something such as this. Do you find that it might be family members who are booking?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes, yeah. And they'll still have the regular, pick up the phone call option, but for those who are, and what we're seeing here in Nova Scotia is it's no longer just what we would consider a traditional vulnerable population having to rely on our services. It's the general public.
Right. Yes.
So, yeah.
Nicole, do you have anything to add there?
Well, we don't have anything too techy here. Basically, it's a phone call to the office, and we have a shared Outlook calendar with the transit driver, and that's the extent of our tech here.
Mm-hmm. But for the community, I mean, due to the size, that it seems to work okay for now.
For now, it works, yes.
Yeah.
And I think too, like, people will call and want to ride right now, and so it's trying to educate them to, try and book ahead, because it doesn't always work to call and get a ride right now. So
yeah, no kidding.
Our part of our provincial, sorry Jessica, I just wanted to address that. Part of the requirements for the provincial funding for our 23 operators is it has to be advanced booking. Yeah, so a minimum of 24 hours notice, and that's part of the funding criteria from the province.
Yeah, that's good to know. Given the opportunity of sustainable transportation options, do you see any current eco-friendly transportation options being utilized, such as carpooling, cycling infrastructure, or electric vehicle adoption? And I mean, you've already spoken about the electric vehicle adoption, Lesley, but any other thoughts on those two?
One thing that our providers are really good at is finding efficiencies, and so it is never considered similar to a taxi ride. They may have multiple riders in the vehicle at any one given time, and they also ask for flexibility from their ridership. So particularly when they have to do long distance travel, say to Halifax for medical appointments, they may ask their riders to be flexible, that they may arrive a few minutes early or have to wait a few minutes late, so that they're able to have more than one individual traveling at the same time. So, that takes less cars off the road each time.
Do you have any comments on that? No, sorry, Nicole, go ahead.
No, that's okay. For charters, we try not to do just a one person charter. It can be difficult depending on those medical appointments, because mostly for shopping, for sure, like we don't do just one person to take them shopping to the city, but for medical appointments, sometimes we don't have that option because of their appointments with those providers. So as far as the carpooling, I know that happens already in town here with some, and the electric vehicle option is interesting for this type of service. So I will definitely look into that federal program that you talked about.
Yeah, no, that doesn't come without its challenges. And in fact, one of our providers is online today. And she was new to the adopting electric vehicles into her fleet. And just this morning, her and I were talking about the difficulties she has in maintaining that vehicle. So here in Nova Scotia, we are well behind the 8 ball in the infrastructure to support electric vehicles. we're open to doing it, but it's problematic. But then there's also, you know, the hybrid piece right now. Hybrids are really good right now, in terms of the gas mileage and that whole thing. So even that in between, Nicole, is an option, and some of them were fortunate to be funded for hybrid vehicles.
Okay.
I just have a question here that's not on the list, but I was just thinking, do any of you have any experience with joining forces with some of the different Indigenous communities that maybe are within your area? I mean, often bands have their own vehicles and have maybe some more funding attached to transportation, moving members, you know, from their very rural communities to urban centers for a variety of different reasons.
Yes. Yeah. We have several of our providers who have partnered with the bands within their geographic areas and provide transportation. Yeah. And you know, it's always a work in progress in terms of supporting the community, and as community needs change, adapting to that and being flexible. So
I know there's 2 First Nation communities close to
I have to go. I'm really sorry. I gotta go. I have dogs killing my chickens in my backyard, I think.
Oh, okay. We're wrapping up anyway.
As soon as I
Thank
can.
you. Go ahead, Nicole. What were you saying?
I was going to say, so both of the First Nations have medical taxis that I know of, but there's never been any communication, I guess, with them regarding a joint service. Or you know, there's also the day program here has their own vehicle, and actually I believe it's a used one of ours that they had, but it's they had specific times that they needed it for, and so it just worked out better for them to have their own vehicle. So yeah, but there should be some discussions with all groups on this front for sure.
I mean, pooling resources is always, you know, you get a lot more. You can, you know, sometimes with pooling resources. I think that's all the questions, Nicole. I just have like from me, I just have a question here in the chat. So it says, what do you typically pay the driver? Are they essentially on call, or do you have scheduled dates and times?
So we have scheduled dates and times. It's not operational full time. So it's 2.5 days a week. And we pay the driver $17 an hour, and they have the benefits and the pension. Like they're a permanent employee of the municipality.
That's great. Now, does anyone here in the meeting have any questions for Nicole? And you can just either type it in the chat or just come on into the view here. Nicole, do you have anything else to add in terms of the rural transportation situation in Saskatchewan?
I guess it is it's not a profitable venture by no means, but there are benefits to having it for those, you know, specific populations. You know, and I guess in Saskatchewan we're so vast, and you know, if you can get together with your neighboring community and try and get something going, you know, that would be probably a good idea. As I mentioned before, I have been in contact with our neighboring communities, and it's a work in progress. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that right now, I guess.
Yeah, no, and that's great. And I mean, if there's no other questions, I think we can wrap this up. Unfortunately, Lesley had to go. But thank you everybody very much for joining. Thanks, Nicole, for taking this time and participating in this session.
You're welcome.
And don't forget to register for SEDA's Provincial Summit that is happening in October. Thank you. I'm going to stop this.